President Trump and the media are fighting an increasingly nasty culture war, which flared up when he tweeted about how NASCAR's only full-time black driver, Bubba Wallace, should apologize and that the noose incident, quote, and flag decision has caused the lowest ratings ever. The flag decision is the league's new ban on Confederate flags at its events, and the topic totally dominated Kayleigh McEnany's press briefing.
My question is, why is the president so supportive of flying the Confederate flag?
Does he think it was a mistake for NASCAR to ban it?
The president said he wasn't making a judgment one way or the other. You're focusing on one word at the very bottom of a tweet that's completely taken out of context and neglecting the complete rush to judgment on this.
Ratings.
Why would the president not praise NASCAR for removing the Confederate flag?
What exactly does the president see as positive or uniting then about the Confederate flag?
Jillian Turner, I've rarely seen a press secretary get hammered on one subject the way that Kayleigh McEnany did, and I think it's because she kept insisting the president has no position on the Confederate flag when the tweet would certainly indicate that he was critical of NASCAR.
He clearly does have a position on the Confederate flag, and this is not a situation where the press bombarded the press secretary at the briefing because they wanted to. They got dragged into this because President Trump keeps talking about it and keeps tweeting about it. Once he does that, it is their responsibility to bring it up with the press secretary. So let's get the facts straight about the order of these things. This is an unforced error for President Trump. It's perfect opportunity for him to stay out of the fray, not make unforced errors here. He didn't have to wade into these waters, getting embroiled in not only the argument about the Confederate flag, but the ongoing argument about race in sports, which brings us back to Colin Kaepernick. It would have been a lot cleaner for him messaging-wise if he had just stayed out of it, and then Kayleigh wouldn't have been put in that position at the briefing.
Right, and Ben, even some on-air conservatives agreed with the media verdict here, which is that it made no sense, especially after those July 4th speeches that generated so much coverage, for the president to suddenly weigh in on NASCAR and Confederate flags.
Well, first off, I have to say, I think we should all feel good about the Bubba Wallace story, since it turned out that this was not something that was clearly intentionally done. It's like so many other stories that look like racial incidents at first. There was an explanation for this along the same lines as we've seen in other instances, such as those ropes hung from a tree out in California. And so I think that's actually a good thing that we should take away from it. In this instance, I think the president always tries to fire away at what he views as political correctness and the problems related to it. But I want to circle back to something that Jillian just said there, which I think is incorrect. The president gave a speech at Mount Rushmore, and the next day, the Washington Post ran a front page article from Bob Costa and from Phil Rucker that lied, that said right off the bat that he had given a speech defending Confederates. And that's something that they didn't correct. They didn't roll back. I think the president is actually engaged in the media on this because the media continues to try to make this about Confederate statues and Confederate symbols when that's not what's actually being attacked. They're trying to gaslight the country into turning this into something that it isn't, which is looking at the Confederacy as opposed to attacking the people that are on Mount Rushmore, attacking Christopher Columbus, attacking the whole of America's heritage. And I think that the president's very well aware of that.
Yeah, well, I will say there was a lot of red meat, as we discussed last week, for conservatives in those weekend holiday speeches. But Clarence, I want to come back to this. First of all, even many people on the right saying Bubba Wallace has nothing to apologize for, although it turned out the noose incident was not a hate crime. But in her response to reporters, Kayleigh McEnany said, "Why have I not gotten a single question on the weekend surge in murders in New York and Chicago, including children? You work for a Chicago newspaper. Isn't that a fair point?"
I think it is not a fair point because that's not this real story that the president should be involved with. The president has had a burr under his saddle for a Chicago crime for a long time. But as I wrote in my weekend column here, what happened to that expert on Chicago crime who was going to solve the whole problem in a week? That was what President Trump promised me and other members of the Tribune editorial board, repeated that on the campaign trail, and has yet to come up with this expert of his who's going to solve Chicago crime. He loves to grandstand about Chicago crime. That's what we're seeing here again, as with the Confederate flag, as with the Bubba Wallace incident. Ben is right. Bubba Wallace's story is a good news story. President Trump has just lost the narrative here in going back to how he began his campaign back in Mobile, Alabama, 4 years ago. And this is his base. And NASCAR, the mostly white male and Southern-oriented constituency of NASCAR, if you will, that's Trump's base. He kind of feels like he owns it. How dare somebody tell my friends they can't have a rebel flag flying?
Well, I was just making the point that the surge in violence in a lot of big cities doesn't get a whole lot of coverage, maybe because it's considered something that's been ongoing for years. Jillian, final question, quick point. Some pundits say that the president...
Chicago violence gets a lot of coverage.
All right. Well,
Chicago
obviously it does. All right. I was talking about nationwide media coverage. Jillian, when the president tweets about not just NASCAR, but... Okay, Jillian, when the president tweets not just about NASCAR, but he's against the Washington Redskins or the Cleveland Indians changing their name, a lot of people say, well, it's a distraction from COVID and the economy and all of that. But I think many in the media don't really understand how these issues resonate with a good chunk of the country out there. Quick thought.
And they do resonate with a good chunk of the country, but that doesn't mean these are waters for the president, not just President Trump, but any president to wade into. It's private sector business. I don't think that there is really a place for any American president to weigh in on what he thinks about the name change of a sports team. Same like NASCAR. Perfect opportunity for President Trump to stay out of the fray, to stay above the chaos. Missed opportunity.
Right. Well, this president weighs in on just about everything. Jillian, we'll see you a little later. Ben Domenech, Clarence Page, thanks very much for joining us. Coming up, why